Hello and welcome to this webinar on the Primary Music Toolkit, delivered by the ISM Trust and supported by the SMA. So I'm Dr. Ali Daubney. I'm a teacher, really, I suppose. First and foremost, I've worked as an instrumental teacher and as a classroom teacher, teaching primary and secondary music in special schools for more than 20 years. Done lots of work on curriculum development, most currently though involved with teacher education, pre-service and in-service, and I work a lot with Martin Faultley, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other materials as we go through. But before we begin today, I've just got a few technical points, because you can't see me, but you should be able to see my screen and the PowerPoint presentation, and you should also be able to hear me, but I can't hear you. So if you've got any questions, then please could you type them in the questions box, and I'll answer as many as possible at the end of the presentation. Now, this webinar is being recorded and will be available to view on the ISM's website at ism.org/webinars. So thank you for joining us today. We have recently put the toolkit out and put it up online on the website, and I'm going to talk through some parts of it today and take some questions, as I was saying later on, about the different parts. Where you will find the toolkit, if you want to look at it as I'm talking today, is ismtrust.org/primary-toolkit, as on the screen. I'll tell you just a little bit about this work and why it came about, because Martin Faultley and I, he's from Birmingham City University, we've been working a lot on curriculum over the last few years together on different things, and we know from much research that's been going on over a long period of time, really, that there's a bit of a hole in primary music, which is quite unsurprising because even from my own perspective, the primary trainees, primary postgraduate trainees, only get in my institution 2 hours of music in their entire training. I know others get slightly more, and I know others get none, and sometimes even if they get quite a bit, they go into school and see no primary music being taught. So that's really why the toolkit came about, and why I was thinking that it would be a good thing to put something there which is for all primary teachers to be able to go and access. So the toolkit has got 6 interlinking parts, of which we're going to really look at 2 in more detail today. The first part, which is part of today, is an introduction to music in the primary curriculum. The second part, singing and vocal work, I wrote in conjunction with Sing Up, but it's not all Sing Up materials, although I am delighted that obviously Sing Up have made available some materials for this part of the toolkit which were previously behind their paywall, so I want to thank them very much for that. The third part is about using musical instruments in the classroom, which we're going to be looking a little bit at today. The fourth part, composing, improvising and what I call doodling, because I think sometimes the language around composing can be quite intimidating or not very easy to understand for young children. The fifth part is about technology, and although it's separated into a separate part, of course technology does actually permeate all of the other areas of the toolkit and indeed music education. And the sixth part is about music across the creative curriculum. So thinking about music not just as a subject, I say just, but as a subject in the curriculum, but also something that we can use through the curriculum. Now, I said interlinking at the top of this because I firmly believe that each one of these parts relates to the others. So today we're going to be looking at the introduction, first off, thinking about primary classroom music and why it's important, who it's for, some things around language and the inclusion factor, modelling, demonstrating the kinds of things that as a teacher you need to do, and then a kind of little introduction to how to use the toolkit. Now, to be very clear, this toolkit is not supposed to be an exhaustive list of this is what you do in primary music education in week 1 and then you move into week 2. So the point of it is really to give a background to the ways in which primary music might be organised, and it signposts quite a lot of other resources. At the end of each section is a resource section, and the idea of that is that you can go and explore in your own time to find out more about different aspects which you may be interested in. So we've tried to link quite a lot of different schools, for example. There's some schools on there who very kindly share all of their work through their websites. There are some organisations, there's lots of kind of free materials on there, so signposting really in the direction of other things. So I thought basically we'd start very quickly today with something on values, because I believe that's what underpins what we do and why we do it. And thinking about the question, what do you value in music education? Now, if I gave you some time to think about this, which I can't because we've only got the hour today to get through everything, but the things that people come up with are often around that they want it to be inclusive, that they want music basically to be for everybody, that they want them to be able to explore, to have opportunities, to kind of feel the aesthetic things around music, the feeling that you get using it in different ways as well-being, to be able to progress musically through music education, to be creative, all of these kinds of things. And if you wrote a list for yourself, I'm sure it would be much more extensive than that. But one of the nice things that you can do with that is think about what are your values, and then thinking about the young people that you work with, thinking about what their values of music education. And I suppose one of the real issues with music education over the last few years in schools is that in a lot of primary schools, there's a lovely aspiration that children from the ages of 5 to 14, as it was said recently by the government, have music in the national curriculum every week, week in, week out, and the opportunity to do all of the things which the music curriculum suggests they will be able to do. But the reality of it is that that's not actually the case. But I firmly believe that you need to think about the values that you hold and think about the decisions that you make about music education in your classroom and in your school. And if you thought about what the values actually are, and then how you can include more music in the curriculum, and then thinking about what are the behaviours, the attitudes and the habits you want to promote through music education. So not just the values, but what are the behaviours, habits and attitudes that you want young people to have. Just before we move on from that, something very lovely you can do if you're feeling a bit down about music is to draw one of your values in the middle of a page of A4 paper, and then on the top half write everything you've done in this half term that contribute to that value, and then draw a line and then a dotted line underneath, write down all of the things related to your values that you might do over the next half term. And it's just really a very affirming way of thinking about what is it that I want from music education and what am I actually doing. And I think you'll realise that there's a lot of things that you do in your school and in your classroom that promote and help you live your values rather than just laminate them. So, thinking about music in the curriculum. Well, it is a statutory subject within the national curriculum that Ofsted have been thinking about recently quite a lot about the broad curriculum. And there was a speech from Amanda Spielman very recently recognising that Ofsted necessarily haven't always done the right thing by the curriculum, but it's something that they appear to be looking at the moment quite considerably. Now, their Ofsted most recent handbook says that the broad and balanced curriculum inspires pupils to learn, and the range of subjects and courses help pupils acquire knowledge, understanding and skills across all aspects of their curriculum, including, and at the end it says, artistic learning. So within the Ofsted handbook, actually, it's a very important part of what's there, and we can only hope that our friends from Ofsted take their review of the curriculum quite seriously. It's quite nice to see that they don't really put anything in there. There's a lot at the moment about how music makes you better at this and better at that, and the Education Endowment Fund, I understand from reading yesterday, are about to do a study on all of the transferable benefits of music, which is great, but we have to also remember that we teach music for the sake of music and all the musical kind of outcomes and things that you get from that. Thinking about music education and who it's for then. So I wanted to go back to John Painter here, 1982. He said, before the national curriculum came into place, that music education does have a place as a timetabled classroom subject in the curriculum, and it should be available to all pupils, which is something I fundamentally agree with. That it should be seen as part of a general policy for arts in education. The arts offer unparalleled opportunities for the development of imagination, sensitivity, inventiveness and delight, which are possibly things you might even list as values that you want from education. Essential elements in a balanced curriculum, he says. He also says this, that music in the classroom is the core of school music activity, and from there we can develop extracurricular music making, which leads me to this, which is about our responsibility. I've been thinking about this quite a lot, and I have come to the conclusion that if we don't all take the responsibility to give all children a music education in the classroom, we can't guarantee they're going to get a music education at all. So with that in mind, we actually need to think about what the music education that we want to explore is. So, thinking about music education, I came up with a way of looking at the national curriculum. The national curriculum for music has just got a few bullet points. It's got a statement at the front, which is the same across all key stages. It could be interpreted as being incredibly vague, but when you think of it in other ways, actually, I think it can be quite powerful. So the diagram, which hopefully you currently see on your screen, is something I took a word of the national curriculum for key stages 1, 2 and 3, because I was trying to help people understand. So they were asking me questions about whether the bullet points, for example, were hierarchical, or some of the things which seemed to be in the opening statement of the national curriculum weren't represented in the bullet points. So I thought of it in another way, and I have to say it beautifully came out as I wanted it to. In that musical understanding sits in the middle, and that is brought about through performing, composing, playing, voices, listening to the things that we would say were the active things around music. So we learn about music through being engaged musically, through doing these practical things. Through that, we use and learn about notations, we use technologies, we develop confidence, discrimination, which is critical as a musician. Fluency is king. If you go back to some of the things that have been written about that in the past, so we're aiming for musical fluency. So actually, when people ask what music education is, thinking about it in this way is a really useful way to do that. Now, Martin Faultley and I have used created some curriculum materials around curriculum assessment and pedagogies for primary schools and secondary schools. And one of the things we talked about is about how the musical learning is built on a spiral. And you can see here just one example of that. The idea of this is that there is increasing challenge, but there are things that you keep coming back to, which really shows us that the music education which we offer in schools, it needs to be continuous. There needs to be the opportunity for these things to keep being consolidated and developed through singing, improvising, playing, and this idea of critical engagement, to be a critically engaged musician, thinking about and listening to what you're playing, what you're creating. And then on the right-hand side, you can see SMSC, spiritual, moral, social, and I think cultural education, and how all of those things go around what we do. Now that links back very closely to the habits, behaviours and attitudes, in fact, which we were just talking about, I was just talking about a couple of minutes ago. So built on a spiral curriculum. And I'm not going to dwell on this today, but what I've just put on the screen for you is the middle section really of the document which we had already produced. So this sits very much kind of embedded throughout the toolkit, which I'm sharing with you at the moment, thinking about how to structure all of the ideas that you have to build those into a curriculum and to assess them in ways which are kind of musical and meaningful. So there's a link on the end of the slides today for you to go and find this to have a look at. So although it's not one of the 6 parts of the toolkit, as in the 6 which I defined earlier, it is actually the kind of wrap around, I suppose, or wrap all the way through, which kind of draws all of these things together to help you kind of understand what music making is. So I'm going to move on to a couple of things which are sections in the toolkit. The toolkit's broken down so that each of the sections is quite short and you can dip in and dip out, and you can also download it if you want to. But I want to think about the importance of language, because I think this is something that we need to think a lot more about and just be very mindful of. And here are some examples. So this first one, I've heard this quite a few times in schools. I've probably been guilty of it myself in the past. Standing up in assembly and saying, could all the musicians gather in the hall for 5 minutes at break time so that we can sort out the music for tonight's concert, which is fantastic for the musicians. But for those who maybe aren't involved in the break time concert tonight. It's starting to perpetuate the idea that there are those who are musicians and those who aren't. So, thinking about the terminology we use in that sense is quite important. Quite recently I heard this one from a teacher talking to a new teaching assistant who just said, we've got quite a few non-musicians in this class, which is something that you hear quite a lot. But again, it splits people into musicians and non-musicians, and my own feeling about this is that we're trying to create an inclusive kind of environment where everybody is considered to be musical or musicking and therefore a musician. So to say we've got musicians and non-musicians, even if it's not in earshot of pupils, can be quite a difficult thing to get past afterwards. And we'll talk about why that might be in a second. What about this one here? You hear this at the beginning of the school year very often. Who plays a musical instrument? Put your hands up if you play a musical instrument. And immediately that can split children. There's been quite a lot of research done about this. It can split children into how they feel about themselves as a musician, because those who play a musical instrument are in the in-group and the rest of them are in the out-group. So thinking very carefully about the language which we use is absolutely crucial. Because of this, really, and I suppose I see a lot of adults, and I have, who come on courses which we run at our university, which are not necessarily our music education courses, but they come along and do different sessions. But I see quite a lot of people who are what I might call recovering from their music education, which is a shame. They were told at a young age that they were not musical, and this quote from Lehman, Sloboda and Woody basically says that they seldom enjoy a childhood of growing musicianship. And my experience of this is that it's not just a childhood, but actually an adulthood of feeling that they were people who were musical. And these are people who go to gigs, play instruments, sometimes play in bands, go to Glastonbury, shout along with music, sing along with bands, and really engage in the kind of musical culture, but don't feel, because of how music education perpetuated these views. Now, something I maybe slightly disagree with is that people who are told at a young age, I think also there's something about the way in which they may not have been necessarily told that they were not musical, but the whole culture around how being musical, the body language and all of that kind of thing, or not getting the smile when they thought at a young age. So all of those kinds of things are also really, really important for how people feel. And I think it relates very much to this thing around self-determination theory, because basically humans have an intrinsic need to relate to their social environment and display competence. We need to perpetuate in primary schools the idea that this is for everybody. So let's consider this, some examples here. This is something I see sometimes in schools. Teachers and teaching assistants sitting on the ends of their rows with their arms crossed, quietly staring straight ahead, looking like they don't want to be there throughout the singing assembly. And if you think about the message that sends about singing and music per se and who it is for, then that's really quite an awkward thing to get past, I think. So that's one example, but it could be so very different. We could, for example, and I've seen this too, whole class instrumental programs led by a teacher from a music service, where the head teacher, the class teacher and the teaching assistant are all joining in, learning the instrument alongside pupils, so that it becomes something that they all do together. So there's something in there about the idea of community and music being for everybody, which is not perpetuated in the idea of people sitting at the end of a row in assembly with their arms crossed, not joining in. This second one comes from a school in Brighton and Hove. It has a community sing-song before school 1 day a week on a Friday. And I know on this particular day of the week, what they do is they open up about 10 minutes early and they invite everybody in, the mummies, the daddies, the buggies, the grannies, the cleaners, the kitchen staff, the teachers, the teaching assistants, even the kids in the school. They all come for a sing-song, and they've now developed in this school 2 songbooks for themselves, songs for a rainy day, songs for a sunny day. And I don't know if it's got anything to do with this, but I can tell you that in this particular school, more children attend school on that day of the week than they do any other day. So building a community is a really important thing to do. And I think that's, a really great way to go about it. It's in a very non-threatening way, it's in a very inclusive way, and it just gets everybody involved. This one here I've seen, and I took this idea myself. I've seen Jackie Schneider, a primary teacher, use it herself. She put up online on her really great school website something at Christmas a couple of years ago with all of the staff in the school. They made an end of term video where they all had Christmas hats on and they were singing along and in different areas of the school, infusing the other members of staff in a school to make something, to share a video in assembly, or even to put a band in assembly. Some schools have put things in, but it's something that we all need to be able to do together. Well, this one here, working with children across the school to choreograph a song and to sing and dance in the playground, because if you work with children about, for example, what they consider to be a great singer, there's no doubt that choreography will come into that very quickly, that they consider that dancing and movement and singing all to be really very interrelated. So doing something like this, again, you give them the ownership of it, let them choose their song, but obviously, as it says, check out the lyrics, because you don't necessarily want all of those in school at the moment. There are so many more things that you could do, but really the point of this is that it's about what we do to kind of model. So I suppose the takeaway point from this for you to consider is, what message does your own musical behaviour and language send about music? And I know, looking back across my career as a music teacher, there are things which I go, yeah, that's really great, I'm really, really proud of that. And then other things and other times when I kind of reflect back and go, oh, maybe the behaviour or the language which I sent at that point actually, in retrospect, wasn't very inclusive or didn't necessarily draw everybody in the way that, I would want that to be. So it's just something for you to think about. And then that of your colleagues. How can you, it's great, we've got all these people today who've logged in and they are very, very invested in music education. We need to kind of spread the love a bit though, and try and think about our colleagues in our schools. As I was saying earlier, if a lot of your colleagues have had either 2 or no hours music training ever, they're going to be feeling, I reckon, pretty underconfident about some of these things. So how can you help them to think about even the behaviour and the language around music that they use that can help perpetuate the ideas that it's for everybody? So thinking about what you can do to support other people to model those behaviours, attitudes and habits you want to see in the young people that you work with. So I suppose this really leads on to musical modelling and the importance of musical modelling. And we are possibly slightly guilty of this in some schools. That's where music is taught by a specialist. Sometimes it's somebody from the school, sometimes it's somebody coming in. It sometimes perpetuates an incorrect assumption that music's for special people, taught by special people, and therefore can only be learnt by special people. And I think that is, again, something that we very much need to get past. And it's absolutely great in a school. I'm absolutely not knocking schools that have a music specialist teacher, but music is something which all teachers can do something with and pick up, which can help to A, inspire the whole curriculum, and B, to get over this idea that we've got those who can and those who can't. I think the ultimate bottom line of this is making music happen in your classroom, led by you and including everyone. But you are the person that needs to do the musical modelling in this sense. So ways that you can do this. Firstly, you need to build your own confidence to model, demonstrate and lead music, which for some people comes very naturally, and for other people they need just, other structures to help them to do that, which is totally understandable. So you have to be able to develop strategies that help you to have the confidence to plan and deliver musical learning in and through the curriculum. And I definitely feel that music education is something as music education that should be taught to or available regularly for all pupils to be able to have some dedicated musical learning time. However, I work with a lot of teachers who, for that to happen might be just a step too far for them to start off with. And so thinking about ways in which you can use music through the curriculum and how you might do that. So you could start simple and think about how it can enhance something you already do. So for example, here's a little demonstration for you. I even brought a couple of musical instruments in today. When I was at school, so this is with apologies to Mrs. Weir, because she taught me French and I was never very good at it, but lundi, mardi, mercredi, jeudi, vendredi, samedi et dimanche, la semaine recommence is the only way which I can remember the days of the week in French. Now, I wish that my friend Kevin, sorry Kevin, had learnt that, because when we went to the French Open a couple of years ago, we turned up with our tickets on Monday and they got rejected at the gate because it was mardi. And he said, mardi, Monday, rather than lundi, mardi. Kevin, it's Tuesday. Anyway, he got a French calendar that year. But it just goes to show how the different things which you do can help with, the music can help to learn a lot of different things across the curriculum. So for a lot of teachers, it might be about you either doing this for yourself or supporting your colleagues to think about something that they already do really well and how they may be able to use music to enhance that even further. So we're going to have a look at part 3 of the toolkit. We're going to come back to part 2 in the next webinar, so there's another webinar next term. But in this one, I want to just have a little look at using musical instruments in the classroom. And there's a list on the screen at the moment of all of the different things which are in the toolkit about this. This is absolutely not, here are some lessons, go and try this out. There are some links on there to some lessons which other people have very kindly shared to help do that. But what I see quite often is that the kind of lack of control from a teacher to actually get the instruments out, or feeling out of control at least, when musical instruments come out. And so the children get overexcited and then they kind of don't do that again because it was general chaos. And so they kind of leave it. And the longer they leave it, the more of a novelty it is the next time the instruments come out. So I've put some things in there about establishing routines, and really importantly, things like getting musical instruments out, putting them away, sequencing instructions, how you might lay out your classroom so that it can be really beneficial. So these are all things for you to kind of go and investigate. I'm going to look at a few of them. Well, first of all, let's define instruments. You need to think about what's available in your school. What about in your locality? What about in your environment? Different schools have got different instruments available, but there are also instruments that we might not consider to be an instrument in their own right. For example, there's some links in there to some things on body percussion, which, you know, making sounds in your environment, all of that kind of thing. Sometimes there are, when I say in your locality, you may be able to borrow instruments. There may be things which are available to you from the part of the music hub, which supplies and possibly teaches musical instruments in your school. And then think about, what about technologies? What technologies have you got available in your school? The national curriculum mentions about technology. It's not specific about that, but technology nowadays is so powerful and so easily attainable. Some schools have got iPads or other tablets or mobile technologies which are available for children to use. Sometimes there are computers in the classroom. There's lots and lots of things that you can do with those. Sometimes it's even about the teacher's laptop, and when you're doing something in story time, putting the laptop and Audacity in the middle of the room, just collecting sounds, all of that kind of thing. Thinking about really, really simple ways in which you can use technologies. But there is a whole section, I think section 5 on technologies, which will help you and link you to some materials which other people have also contributed to. So my takeaway from this is to go and make a list of what you could use and what you have available and what's there. And you can do quite a lot with very little, although there are things that you might want to have. So what I've done is I've put in some basic lists of things. So for example, some tuned percussion and various different instruments that come with that, and then some non-tuned percussion or untuned percussion. Here's an instrument for that. So many other instruments though, beyond tuned and untuned percussion instruments. So although they're named in the national curriculum, there are all sorts of instruments like sets of ukuleles and all sorts of things which are in school and available African drum sets. So the national curriculum isn't saying you should be limited to using these things. It's saying you should be able to, to have access to these. And the tuned instruments, to me, is actually crucially important for people to be able to, young people to be able to have access to. Now, I went into a school which I won't name not too long ago, and they said, Ali, we're really, really well resourced for music. And so I went and had a look in their cupboard, and they got some broken bits of this and that, and they got quite a few xylophone notes and bits of chime bar, but I couldn't actually make a whole octave. So one person's really well resourced is another person's really very under resourced. I think if you look on the toolkit, Anna Rusbach, Downs Junior School, made a video which I've embedded, which is on YouTube, which takes you for a walk around her music room, and she explains all of the different parts of it which she's thought out really carefully, and the instruments which she uses. So there's lots of things you can do to go and have a look at that, and think for yourself about what you might want to be able to use as kind of basic tools. And I wanted to move on to this thing about right and wrong ways to play instruments, because I've been in schools before where they've picked up a tambourine and a child's shaken it, and the teacher has said, no, you hit the tambourine, that's what you do, and you take your hand to the instrument rather than the instrument going to your hand. But they all make different sounds. So one of the glorious things you can do with musical instruments is to explore them and think about, how did I make that sound? How did I make that sound? Pass it to the next person, get them to make a different sound. And playing with lots of instruments in those ways. Or the same with the tuned percussion. Is it correct that this beater is the only beater that you can use? Or I've got one in my hands that I'll tell you what it is in a second. Actually, it looks like Grandma's knitted it. It's got a little bit of knitting on the end. The first one was a wooden beater. This one here, it's got a rubber end on it. I could use the other end of the stick. So I can get different sounds for different purposes, lots and lots of different ways in which the musical instruments which you've got are there. So is there a right and wrong way? Well, sometimes there is. What do you think about this though? Because as I was saying, all of the different instruments have got actually many, many possibilities. And thinking, if you thought about the musical purpose, actually there is a musical purpose for each of those things. It just kind of depends on what it is that your musical purpose is on that day. So again, we need to be very careful with the language we use and about shutting down rights and wrongs. But for example, one of the things that commonly you see with xylophones is where one child will stop their beater on the notes. Okay, yay, I've done it. And then the great teachers say, hey, look what Fred is doing. Let's all have a go at that. And then they can all have a go at holding their beater. Let's think of other ways to play it. So always working with what somebody's got, rather than just kind of shutting people down straight away and saying, no, this is right and this is wrong. So always thinking about musical purpose, but basically we're looking for children to explore and be creative, and also to learn to play different musical instruments in different ways. And of course there is sometimes a place for right and wrong on those. Things about classroom layout are also quite make or break, I think, personally, in music lessons. And therefore, the best layout, you need to think about what is the task that you're doing and what are the outcomes that you're thinking about, because that really defines how you might lay out your classroom. And I would say that it's often not suited to sitting at chairs and tables. So I think when you sign up for a music PGCE, you should actually have a little tagline underneath that says glorified furniture remover, because basically you spend a lot of your time moving things around to make the space as flexible as possible to suit the purpose for which you're looking for. One of the things to think about, therefore, is communication. If you're trying to get children to work in a group, actually working around a big table, even if it's a round table, is not great. Because they can't necessarily hear each other. There's a table in the way. Sometimes it can work, sometimes it can't. Sometimes you might need to work in small horseshoes, which can be a lot less threatening than working in a circle, because some children find it really hard to work in a circle. And so you've got the idea that everybody is looking at me when you're in a circle. So sometimes even small horseshoes, which make a circle, kind of can feel like a safer space. And there's something in there about critical mass of noise to get children to try things out. Don't just point at them and go, Kim, do this now. If you've got critical mass of noise going on, people are more likely to kind of experiment and try things out. So the way you lay the room out actually helps them to be able to facilitate that for themselves. So therefore, as I put at the bottom here, moving the chairs and tables to an appropriate layout significantly contributes to the relative success of a lesson. And thinking about and reflecting on lessons afterwards is often been the layout of things once you've kind of got past that can really help. Some other things here about establishing routines. This blue box here is taken straight from the toolkit, about things about setting up instruments, making a decision about when do you get them out. You could set them up before they come in. You could have a circle, you could put chairs around, and you could put instruments underneath, or you could distribute them efficiently, as I put here, yourself at some point in the lesson when they're required, if not from the beginning. They can be a distraction if they're there all the time. Somebody's attention's paid to that. And you may give children a number and invite them to sensibly collect things. So there's things in here which kind of help you establish routines to get instruments in and out, appointing monitors. And it leads me really onto this question here. Could you easily sit and look at musical instruments in silence whilst they're being distributed? Now, the answer to this for a bunch of postgrad students is a most definite no. And I really like that, and I always really work with that, and I never say anything in the music session that they come in for. I give out the instruments and kind of model how to do that, but I know that as they go back, they're kind of fiddling with things and trying things out, and I don't really stop that. Because it shows them that it's a really hard thing to do, and it has a different environment in a room if you ask people to go and get things in silence and bring them back and just put them down. And there is a place for that at points, but generally I would say give them something to do, something productive while they're getting out and get everything set up. It could be something linked to what they've done before. It could be go and explore the instrument and find the longest and the most unusual sound, or it could be something for today's lesson. So linking somehow to the music. But actually, try it. It gives you a really different start to a lesson. If you start with everybody in silence, sitting there until I say we can do something, or if you're giving instruments out, give them something productive to do. Sequencing instructions is another sequencing instructions is another kind of thing that you might need to think about. And personally, I've been guilty of this many times, even quite recently. And so giving instructions in a logical order, so that the expectation of the learning is understood before pupils are distracted. Sometimes I've said, okay, right, we're going to work in groups of 4 today, and then Sophie's nodding at Ben and kind of trying to ignore Frankie and trying to work out who's going with who without actually listening to a word I'm saying about what it is that we're doing today. It's the same with getting out and trying out instruments. So what we're going to do today is you're going to use your instrument and you're going to play C, D, and E. And then what I want you to do, no, not now, is we're going to move on to do something else. So thinking about the way in which you sequence instructions can really help the pupils with the understanding of what the learning is, and the teacher become a lot less frazzled. This is just a general question about putting a little buffer, I suppose, in between what you've asked them to do and then giving them some thinking time before they go and do it. So what about including planning time? so that pupils have actually got to cognitively engage with the task and think about what they're going to be doing, rather than I'm just going to pick up the biggest drum and bash it as loud as I can now because that's my instrument for today. So it actually makes them think about what it is that they're going to be doing, and giving them, even if it's just 2 minutes of planning time to kind of discuss before they get their hands on the instruments. Here's some specific ideas, again, directly taken from the toolkit, about how to get classes playing, things that you might want. One of the things that we're trying to do in music education per se is around keeping the beat. It can be terribly boring to just sit and clap along to a piece of music. Using different instruments, they can tap parts of their body, they can move in time, they can march, they can do all sorts of things when singing, chanting, moving around the classroom, between different activities at different points. So there's all sorts of things like that they could be doing. They could be playing rhythms of word phrases from songs, so they could just take their name and give them ideas to get them started. So sometimes with instruments it's a question of recreating, and sometimes it's a question of creating, so playing somebody else's music and learning it as it is, or and it's not really an or, but being playful with sounds and coming up with their own, because actually there's such an overlap between these two, and being playful with music is something, to me, that's a really, really desirable kind of thing that we're trying to get them to do. Calling and echoing, copying rhythms and melodies, creating calls for other people. So many lovely activities that you can do around following conductors, getting half the class to turn their back, so they are just following the sound that the rest of the class are making with the instruments, to see if their idea of loud and soft looks as the conductor looks, which obviously be a very slight time delay, but it's a good fun thing to do, but it actually makes them use their ears rather than their eyes as well. Learning melodic parts, there's lots of examples. If you go to some of the schools which I've highlighted on there, some of their work, you can click into different parts and you can find examples of whole classes playing together in unison or playing different parts. And the last two there about manipulating ideas, taking things, musical phrases or something that they already know, melodies, those kinds of things, and adapting them and kind of having a go. I think really though the answer is down to this, about having a stimulus and having something that makes the music making worthwhile, or the music creation worthwhile, and have some kind of purpose. So there's some examples of stimulus kind of ideas here. They could use a story, or they could use a storyboard, or you could use music within the parts of the curriculum at other times when they've got some kind of story or storyboard idea going on. They could create it themselves even. Using a song or a piece of instrumental music to get them started. They could have a musical purpose. What's the musical purpose? Why are they doing this? What's the purpose of it at the end? Is there something that they might be doing with it? And sometimes it's not always about the end product to us. It's about the learning through the process. But to kids, it's quite often about where is it going to be? What is its purpose? This one here, you can use a series of colours, or you can use pictures. I really like with my PGCE students, I don't know if any of them are listening today, but if they are, I'm just giving the game away. But I put up a Kandinsky painting and just say, play me a bit of Deep Purple. And I just get them to think about the different purples on this particular Kandinsky painting, and how they can adapt the sounds they make on the instruments to represent the colours which they see. And with very young children, you can just ask them what different colours might sound like. Just lay out 3 pieces of paper on the floor, one in green, one in yellow, and one in blue, and even just play them something and say, what colours does it make you think of and why? So it's a way of also getting them to talk about music and get inside music from that way. So using colour is a really powerful way to do that. Using particular musical structures, whatever they may be. It can be through listening to things or creating them for themselves. If you take the melody, for example, of Voltavar, getting them to think about different words that they might put into that to make that melodic phrase, or to paint to it, or to create their own music, so that they all learn that bit together, thinking about the musical shapes to get them inside the music, and then having a journey down a river, put a river down the middle of the classroom so that when you get to various interludes, they've got each group putting in their own bit, and then as you travel down the next bit of the river, everybody together making a rondo who's got da 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 da, etc. So things about musical structures, so many things you can do around that. Or, for example, starting with a musical phrase, which whatever that may be, but just as a little musical nugget. And if you think about that as a little scratching sound there, and then you've got 20 seconds, this group, to go and do something with that scratching sound, while another group's got this rubbing sound, and another group's got what? And just making 3 little snowballs and then bringing them together. So, you know, there are so many things that you can do with instruments and just with not very much at all, but around having a stimulus, it's really useful to be able to do that. But thinking first about what's the musical purpose of what I want them to be able to do. So we're kind of rolling towards the end of what I'm going to talk about today. A lot of the ideas today, big plug coming up here, thank you Sage, have come from the Toolkit and also from Teaching Primary Music, which came out in April this year. There's some information there about it. But we are going to be doing 2 more webinars, one in the spring term and one in the summer term. One around singing and vocal work, and one around kind of creativity and embedding doodling, I suppose I want to call it, in the music curriculum. And if you want any details of practical workshops relating to Primary Toolkit, there's an address on here, which is Kim, who's very kindly put all the technical things together today for the workshop. So those are there for you too. So if you've got any questions from today's workshop, then we're going to have a look at those in just a second. The materials from the Toolkit are here, as I said at the beginning, ismtrust.org/primary-toolkit. And then the other materials which I was talking about, which are like the wraparound of the toolkit, if you like, the thing that holds it all together, the link is also on there for you. So I'm just going to take a quick sip of water while I have a look to see if there's any questions. Radio silence, I can't see anything at the minute. I'm not sure if that means they haven't come through or nobody's asked a question today, but if you've got a question that you'd like to ask. What will the next session cover? Okay, so we think, thank you John, that the next session is going to be around singing and kind of vocal development and ideas. The sessions really just kind of scratch the surface of the things that are in the toolkit and give some kind of basic ideas and guidance and a few practical little tidbits, I suppose, here and there. But vocal work kind of through the curriculum will be the next session. And then the final session, which will be in the summer term, will be around getting children to create their own music. Actually, I've seen quite a lot of John's and heard quite a lot of John's pupils' work. So hopefully sharing some ideas of different things that people have done. Thank you for that question, John. I've got a question here from Rachel, asking if I'm able to discuss primary monitoring, assessment and tracking from EYFS and Key Stage 1. Now, in terms of tracking and monitoring and assessment, the diagram which I showed in the middle, which Martin Fortley and I put together, has got quite a lot of ideas on that. In terms of EYFS and how that fits together, Rachel, if you want to drop me an email, that's something that I probably can't answer in 2 minutes or so, but alison.daubney@gmail.com, if you drop me an email and we can discuss things around EYFS. John's question says, how much of this is covered in your book? But I'm not quite sure about what exactly he's asking is covered, unless he's meaning the monitoring and tracking. There are some bits in there. I mean, obviously within a book there's a lot more information. There are a few things on the toolkit, but most of the things around monitoring, tracking, assessment, progression, all of that kind of thing comes more in the materials from Martin and I, but that is more about primary than it is around the EYFS curriculum. I don't know if there's any other questions. Oh, Oh, thank you, John. John says he'll look at purchasing my book, which is very kind of him. Thank you. So we've just got a couple of minutes left, really. So if anybody else has got any questions that they want to ask. I know I've talked a lot today. It's quite difficult to do a session on primary music with a microphone and not very many. I've got plenty of instruments I could use, but trying to kind of bring that to life. But the idea really of the toolkit is to give the background to all of these kinds of things. And so, you know, it can link to lots of other things that you can go and have a look at for yourself. So really the toolkit has got lots of other people's ideas. I'm a bit of a fan of magpieing, so that if there's other ideas that people are using, we can look at them and adapt them and change them and think about how we'd use them ourselves. Now, Rachel's just asked a really interesting question. She says, is there a way to receive a document of proof that we've attended this today, just in terms of collating CPD at school? And the answer to that is yes. Kim's pointing to a piece of paper and saying it will be sent. So that's fine. So if you do want some proof that you've attended today as part of CPD, then that will be fine. If you just drop an email to kim@ism.org, and Kim will organise for something to be sent out to you. That isn't a problem at all. Aileen has put up, let me just have a quick read. I found the husband. Oh, this is very interesting. It's what I was talking about earlier. Aileen's saying she found the whole school learning, including teaching staff, worked really well, and it changed the ethos of the school and improved the attendance. So, as I was saying, thinking about spreading the love of music and trying to get everybody involved, actually it looks like that's Aileen's experience too, that's hugely important. And I think it's very hard for a head teacher and senior management to kind of ignore things that are going on in music. If you, for example, send a child down, as I nicked this idea from a teach meet a couple of weeks ago, where a teacher at Hastings said she always sends a child down now with an invitation for the head teacher to come to the concerts and to give it to them personally and ask them if they want to come. It's very, very hard for them to say no, but then when they're there, they love to do that kind of thing. So trying to kind of draw people in. I know I've put up some ideas of people's websites, you know, getting people to engage with the websites and see the work that their children are doing outside school, and realising that music can be really, you know, it's part of what they're doing. It just draws everybody in and just makes people take more interest, which I think in itself is a self-perpetuating thing. There's something else coming here. It says at school we run some CPD training sessions for our classroom assistants in younger primary in order to help them feel more confident. And that's been really very well received. And I think that possibly quite a few people I would think who've logged on today are probably related to music, being music coordinators in the school. And actually a big part of the role of that is trying to help the other staff to be able to feel confident. So I'm really glad, Rachel, that that's gone down really well, because I think there is a massive job to be done to help people to feel confident to be able to join in. And if we want people to be able to support us well in our classrooms, then obviously to make them feel confident rather than feeling very self-conscious about it is a really, really good way to go about it. So I think that's all of the questions for today. Thank you very much for joining us. And we will let you know when the next session is going to be. It's probably going to be in the second half of the next term. So it's the first time I've said it this year, but I'll say goodbye and Merry Christmas.